Rasmus, thank you so much for joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Having previously read a couple of your books and I'm well aware of your work at Potential Project, I've been really intrigued to see where this conversation goes today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And it's wonderful to have such an open ended podcast that goes much deeper than most of the other fluff that's out there.
So, as you're aware, then, Rasmus, we jump straight in with, is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
At least for me, yes, but that question comes in different versions, at least different stages of life. But there has been one that has been fairly consistent, and it's ultimately like, why are we not happy? Like, we've got everything. We get a new bike. We are very exalted with that new bike. Why aren't we happy 3 days after? Like, that was a question that came up for me when I was like quite young, and it was a question that I only realized some years ago has been leading both my professional and personal life. Like, why are we not happy? And then the offshoot question is, what does it take to be happy? And that's been like definitely a long journey for me to figure that out. And there's not one single answer. Unfortunately, I wish there was. If there was, I would have written a book and become a billionaire, and then I wouldn't have been happy either.
And just when you mentioned there that it was is from a young age, can you give us a sense of when you think that kind of initial thought may have emerged?
Yeah, it was around 8 or 9 that became a theme for me. And I remember I wrote in my diary back then something along the lines of, I want to become a professor and understand why we are not happy. Like, why does happiness evade after a while? If I can become a professor, figure that out, then I can make everybody happy. And that was kind of my thinking back then. It was very, very naive and very, I think it was very sweet. I'm actually happy I had that thought, and that has been kind of the thread through my life, just in different ways.
And when do you get a sense that as an adult that was kind of somewhat picked up further?
It was definitely like, I started to get more clarity of the answer when I, like you, went to Nepal and in India, or at least I know you've been in India. I don't know about Nepal. Have you been there?
I got engaged in Nepal, yeah.
Ah, wow. Okay, now that's a whole story I want
I
to
don't
hear.
want to distract too much.
Is that with a Nepali or someone else?
A German lady, that's why I'm in Berlin now.
Okay, wow. Okay, now that's something. When was this?
This was 10 years ago, actually.
Okay,
Mm.
wow. What a blessed place to be engaged. Well, so Nepal being this incredible country that is so poor, so corrupt, like living standards super, super low, but people are smiling. People are genuinely incredibly helpful, kind, friendly. It's just in the earth. And I remember coming there when I was 17, and it completely blew me away, like how this contrast, it just, and back then I couldn't put a word on it or describe why, define why that was, but it took a hold of me, and ever since then, so that's like 5 years now, I've been coming in and out of Nepal and India, because what is in that culture are, some wisdom traditions, some ancient old pathways of how do you train your mind and your heart to be a happier, kinder, wiser person. And so that has been the closest I've come to a consistent answer, is what I found in those traditions coming from the East.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that lovely sentiment you mentioned there of you sensed it was somewhat in the earth in terms
Mm.
of the happiness that people seem to be engaging with?
Mm. I'm probably just telling myself stories, because what do I know? Like, how did this kind of culture with these kind of neurological makeups arise in a culture like that? And I really don't know. But the hypothesis I have is that a lot of wise people, a lot of people in that part of the world, so let's say from the foothills of Himalaya and up to Tibet on that stretch, and also into China and into India and so on, but especially in that stretch up in the mountains, there's just been thousands and thousands, if not millions and millions of, definitely millions of people that have dedicated themselves to the inner work of essentially, understanding the old question, who am I, and what makes us as humans happy. And I think that is part of it. So there's a whole tradition, there's a culture of looking in, introspection, a culture of developing inner attributes rather than just focusing on building spaceships and better chewing gum like other parts of the world.
For you, I just when did just out of interest, when did the this inner journey, did that start becoming a focus for you?
That was at 17. At 17, no, at 16, I heard the word Nepal and the word meditation, and I knew that those were two words that I didn't know anything about, or a place and an activity that I didn't know anything about, but that I needed to find out. And so I got some instructions on meditation, which didn't work very well. And then I packed my bags and went to this weird place, Nepal, that I didn't know anybody that had been there. That was a turning point because then I got in contact with, well, then I was walking around Kathmandu, and I remember seeing small children without hair and in these saffron colored, like weird shawls. And I said to a friend that I was walking with that day, hey, that's Tibetan Buddhist monks. And I remember saying that word, and I was like, where did that come from? And I just knew that's that kind of where what they represented was something that I needed to merge with. And so I ended up going to a monastery and spending some time there. And that has then been the journey in and out of monastery and places like that since then.
It's, what you said about people in either Nepal or Kathmandu, or even along that stretch that you're alluding to. Fully felt that too myself, but just curious from your perspective, what is it about when you mention the sentiment of even a wisdom, or something about the heart as well, in terms of happiness? Like,
Mm.
what did you start to notice in terms of just even the contrast between a
Mm.
life that you were in and a life
Yeah.
that you were seeing?
Yeah, I think the first contrast was the one I mentioned about they're very poor, but they're smiling. They're very poor, they don't have enough for themselves, but they still give. That just didn't, I just couldn't comprehend, like, why was that? Why did I came there as a rich traveler from the West and they knew I had like more money than them? Why did they invite me out for dinner? Why did they buy me coffee on the street? And it was just a different model than I was used to. And then when I started to engage in some of these incredible practices that have been developed for at least 5,000 years that we are aware of, and especially in the last 2,500 where it really picked up pace, like I could feel an inner transformation that I got, I don't want to say hooked, but I was like, this is tough, but this is really good. And that became my life path just because it really worked for me.
It's It's so interesting, just the that element there you mentioned of people giving when they have so little. From all your time spent in whether it's Nepal or India, do you have you got a clearer sense of how that has come to be, and why we are what we are like maybe in other parts of the world?
I think at least how we're like in other parts of the world, and this is going to sound like a cliche, but we know money don't buy us happiness. Obviously, we know we need to have a certain level, and then after that, more money really doesn't help our overall sense of well-being and joy and fulfillment. But we certainly live in a culture that has been indoctrinating that as the model. Like, if you want to have happiness. You get a good education, so you get a good job, so you get a good car, a good house, a good spouse, and then you get a better job and a bigger house and a bigger car. Maybe you replace the spouse, maybe you keep it, but you're constantly looking externally. And we just like, there's no psychology, there's no neurology, there's no studies supporting that works. On the contrary, there's a lot of studies showing that doesn't work. Like, it really doesn't work. So that's at least what's happening in our part of the world. And unfortunately, it's also happening in that part of the world now with, of course, internet and social media. And I was just spending some time in Dharamsala in December with Dalai Lama and some of the monks around there, and that were telling that young young boys for whom it used to be attractive to become a monk and like go into many years of study, they don't want that anymore. Like, it's really hard to get young monks because they see on the internet that if they go to America, they can get a car or a fridge. And so this whole tradition is really threatened as is now because of the wonderful ideas we have from our part of the world. So it's very sad. I don't know what you keep asking. Why is it that these things have emerged there? The only thing I can say is there's been people that have walked this path very thoroughly for many thousands of years, and I think those insights are imbued in society there to a different degree than what we know in our part of the world.
It's um, it's it's quite a striking thing to do at 16, though, isn't it, or 16 or 17 to decide on Nepal. Just curious as to was there something in the build up to this that you were sensing? I know you mentioned earlier just the idea that you had a bike and at a very young age were even writing about these thoughts.
Mhm.
I'm just so curious as to how you saw some. It seemed like you saw something quite clearly at an age where I think I was obsessed with like football players or something like this.
Yeah, I don't know that I was that clear seeing. I just knew there was something I was looking for. And I knew what I did see clearly was that the Western model of getting the better education and better house and car and all of that, that intuitively didn't add up to me. And I knew there had to be something different. And I had the sense that that was happening there, which fortunately I was correct about. How I was correct, I have no idea. Nobody told me. I hadn't learned, like, it was not in school or anything. So I don't know.
And when you mentioned just the what does it take to make people happy, and this becoming somewhat of a question that you've been that's been kind of moving with you through life. How just intrigued then? How did you start to use that as somewhat of a guiding question in terms of how you approach then life or the work that you do?
Mhm. So when I was about 20, 28, I was, full on a wonderful journey of practicing these things, and that was super, super helpful for me. And then my brother took his own life, and we were very, very close. And he was depressed. We didn't know that he was in that bad a state that he was willing to take his own life. He was. And I was standing and looking at that afterwards and thinking to myself, had he had the methods that I had been fortunate enough to get, that wouldn't have happened. Like, I know that wouldn't have happened. I know that what he experienced was horrible beyond comprehension, but there was nothing in his mind that couldn't have changed with a bit of training, with a bit of reframing, with different perspectives. And that made me look at what am I doing with my life, and did a 1 year retreat with my back then 3 kids and wife, and really reflected on one question: what can I do to bring the most benefit to as many people in this short lifetime? And it was a very humble question. I know it sounds grand, but I really meant it very sincerely, very humbly. And I was reflecting for a long time and thinking that it had to be with children because that was like the future generations and so on. And then I started to look a little bit deeper and I realized, yeah, it's good we can help the children, but if they move into a society that ultimately is, and let's just call it sick, but it's really sick from our values perspective, from some of our values, then it's not going to help that you help kids. So I thought if I go into corporate, I help leaders. One, they will have, better lives. Two, they will bring that on to the millions and billions of people they are leading, and their companies will be more ethical, more compassionate, and so on. So that was my whole, background for why I then started what today is called Potential Project, a global leadership development firm. So it's really through that very difficult experience that I came to this conclusion. This is how I can do most for others.
Well, how did you? What gave you such? I don't know, like clarity around what would have been helpful for your brother. Like, how did you say
Hmm.
that with such an earnestness, if you know what I mean?
Yeah,
What gave you that?
maybe there's two parts to the question. The first one is a preamble to that, and that is up until my brother's death, I was probably quite, I don't want to say self-absorbed, but I was very focused on like how do I have a good life and how do I give that to my wife and my kids. So it was quite narrowly focused. And then I got to spend 5 days with Dalai Lama, and I remember coming out of that with this incredible sense of, and this was not like a conceptual understanding, but it was like deep, deep, deep felt. I'm only one. My family are four. My city is a million. The world is billions. How can I focus on how I feel when there are so many others? And if I can just do the tiniest thing to support more people, why wouldn't I? Like it was just like the simplest math and just such a felt sense of I have so much privilege, I have so much potential with the methods I've been given and living in a society like I am. If I don't make good use of that, I'm not a good person. Like that would have been wrong. And then to the question of how could I be so sure about this? Well, because I had gone through that mill for years, like I knew what it meant to sit down and meditate. I knew what it did to me and to the sparkles in my eyes when I met others to practice compassion. I knew what it did to my sense of self and self-important and selfing and ego to sit for maybe 10 minutes every day and kind of deconstruct that tightly wound solid sense of self that is important and that is rejecting what others are doing. It kind of, I could let go of myself and focus on what I could do for others. And I thought that has made me really like, that gave me so much meaning, fulfillment, joy. And why wouldn't I try to give that to others? Like it was not something I come up with, right? It was not like maybe if everybody take a cold shower every morning. No, this was like traditions that have been done for like 2,500 years. So I knew they worked for others as well. So that's why I was just, of course, this is what the world needs. Not the only thing, many other things, but that is definitely a thing that's helpful.
Could you even just try to describe what that very felt experience was like?
Hmm. Hmm. So I'll give a few examples because they are maybe a bit funny actually. Uh, when I then decided to start this company, of course, I needed to have a lot of meetings and so on. And I hooked up with a guy who became my partner in crime on that. And we started to meet a lot of corporate people. And always at some point during that conversation, I would always, like, in the most sincere way, like, I was like, So is there anything I can do to help you? Like it was just like such a natural thing for me to ask. And I remember Wolfgang, he would like in the first times he would like, why is he asking that question? And then he would start to translate to people that I actually meant it like, is there a way I can help them? And I remember I realized, oh, but that's apparently a contrast to how other people see how we can engage with each other. Because for me, that was such a natural thing. If you're sitting with someone, you're having a conversation, it just seems natural that you at some point ask, now we know each other, is there something I can do for you? So to your question, how did it feel? How does it feel, at least for me? And I don't have that always, and it's not like I'm in no way any saint. Like I've made so many mistakes, been so bad to people so many times in my life. But my experience is when putting enough time into the practice of compassion, then you start to just have that kind of bubbly, loving sense that to me at least feels like it's the space around me that gets quite infused with this warmth that I naturally can't help but to to infuse in anybody I meet. One very particular thing as well is I can feel it in my eyes, like when I have a when I have practiced well and I feel I'm like in a good space, like when I meet somebody and I talk to them, like my eyes are shining, like I can't help but look deep in their eyes and just try to figure out who they are, where they're at, and what they need. And again, this is not about me. This is about the practices are really incredible what they can, how they can rewire ourselves to not worry about ourselves, because that's where our trouble comes from, but rather what can I do for others? And then a great fulfillment comes out of that. And as Dalai Lama says, that's wise altruism or wise egoism is to be altruistic. Like when you help others, you get the helper's high. Why not do that? Everybody wins.
Can you talk to me a little bit about this? Clearly, this heart opening, expanding as well, and infusing the space around you, and also this lovely nod to almost this pragmatic nod to our humanity still, or our humanness, in that we could still, hurt people, or things can still
Hmm.
go in directions that maybe we wouldn't wish for.
Hmm.
And just your kind of general sentiment around that experience in life.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really difficult. Like I find it so difficult to be human. And I don't mean that flippantly. I find it very hard and difficult to be human because in my own experience in my younger life, coming to realize all these wonderful things and having this sense, wow, I really have it figured out now. Like I know what I need to do to be a force for, joy for the people I meet and maybe for the people that my company works for. And then life just has a way of becoming complex or conspiring against you, and even with the greatest of intentions and with the greatest of practice, you end up doing things that you look in the rear mirror and go, why on earth did I do that? Like, why didn't I treat that person more nicely? Why didn't I make a decision that would have been more helpful to another person? And so coming above the 50, I'm like so humbled by how little I know. I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I had a path for my life and what I was going to do, and then at some point you realize, wow, it's really not that simple after all. And whether it's something in you that changes because of age or something in the world or the combination, I'm not sure, but it's definitely mostly within me. And I wish I had just been able to look back and say, I've just done good. But like I could tell you a million things that I would want to do differently to employees, to my kids, to my wife, to just everybody. Yeah, it's really hard. I find it incredibly hard.
It's a fascinating thing, I think, to sit with, and there's something about just being reminded of our humanness to me that just, and I don't mean humanness as just like a category of our behavior that wouldn't be considered pure or something of this nature, but for all of it, like the loving, tender things, and then the edge or the sharpness to it. I don't know. There's something about it that almost feels like it's this too is the path, almost. If you know what I mean, this
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
repeated reminder. And even on some things that I know this pattern, I've explored this source, and look at me, here I am again,
yeah,
almost. Like there's something
yeah,
almost too perfect about it, if you know what I mean. Well,
yeah,
obviously it's not perfect.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's so true. There's this saying that what you do to others is your karma, but what they or how they respond to it is their karma. And at least to me, that gives me a lot of compassion for myself and my own imperfections. I've come into this life maybe with a lot of like past karma from other lives, or at least with a childhood that in my case was incredibly wonderful and with fantastic parents, but still nothing is perfect. So small wounds and scars here and there that you then, in bad moments pass on to others because you just don't know better or you're under pressure. And I've at least had a tendency of beating myself up every time I weren't good to others. And it's only in the last years I've learned to also look at, well, I've been beaten up, whether it's past lives or this life, doesn't matter. Like I have been through the roller coasters myself. And sometimes that have made me show up in ways that I'm not proud of. And I wish I hadn't. But that happens because you're human and it's so imperfect.
Can you talk to me a little bit about that experience over the last, in recent years, of just that compassion with yourself?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. I wish I could say, look at how great I am. I realized we have to be more self compassion because that's what I have taught to others for so many years. Yeah, if you're just good to yourself, then you'll be better to others. But I didn't learn the lesson before I had a real serious health breakdown about a year and a half ago. Like, ended up multiple times in hospital. Nobody could figure out what it was. And like, for a good year or at least half a year, like I was lying on my couch and shaking and pains and couldn't see and like all like just so many symptoms that could be diagnosed. But really, it felt like I was being being beaten up badly by life, which is what I needed to be able to slow down and be kinder to myself. So it wasn't out of, oh, I'm so smart, I just know I need to do a little bit more yoga in the morning. Like I was doing all those things, but I still had it wrong. And somehow my body had to teach me a lesson by putting me lying down for almost 6 months. So what came out of that was definitely a much stronger tenderness. Like I could really see how I'd been really hard on myself, and that experience I told you about after 5 days with Dalai Lama, like let me give to others instead of giving to myself, had probably come with a bit of a, a downside. I have the responsibility of helping others, and in that process really not being very kind to myself, which then also in turn leads to sometimes not treating others in the way that they deserved, simply because I didn't have the capacity. But when you're beaten up enough, is my experience with people and with myself for sure, at some point you surrender and you get much more gentle. And I think that's why older people oftentimes, while there are some grumpy ones, like older people are generally a little bit more considerate. And it's probably because they've taken their beatings through life.
Yeah. I just, when you're saying there, reminds me of an interview I did with a death doula, an author, who talked about having a mastectomy and seeing
Mm.
themselves one night in the mirror in all sorts of ways in which they just wouldn't have considered beautiful.
Mm.
Having criticized themselves physically at different times in life, they were actually able to see their beauty. There is
Yeah.
something a bit like our frailties as humans, as well as all this wonderful practice and all altruistic intentions and things of this nature. There
Mm.
is something about that life just hitting us, or us
Yeah.
having to slow down for something that is also extremely eye opening.
Yeah. Yeah. And I take it from the color of your hair and your beard, like mine is graying, so you're not that young anymore. Like, have you had this experience yourself as you're like getting
Yeah,
more mature, that there's a gentleness that comes with it?
yeah. I've been going grey since I was 21. So I may but I'm 42 now, and look, to be honest with you, Rasmus, like I mentioned just before we started, when I went to therapy in my early 30s, just I wasn't particularly nice in relationships. I was just
Mm.
a
Mm.
nervous, insecure wreck at times, to be honest, and quite jealous. And, you know what I mean? Like, and just needing to
Yeah.
go, okay, this doesn't work anymore. And I remember at that point being really lost by something. And then even when meditation became a part of the journey, that can also be this tool then, if it's handled in such a way where that's a performance thing as
Mm.
well, in
Yeah.
terms of if I don't do these 5 practices each day, I don't deserve something.
Yeah.
And like you, I think I was actually in Peru once for a year, and I remember walking by a stream one day and just having to almost laugh out loud, and in some sort of exasperated sense. I was by this mountain range and this serene stream beside me, and I was judging the hell out of everyone in the town and myself and everything. And I think there's almost something about the spiral that it just intensifies until,
Yeah.
as you say,
Yeah.
surrender seems to be the only
Yeah.
the only way.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like you're a much wiser man than me that at that age. I'm 50, 51. I've only learned in the last few years. I wish I had been faster.
There's things I can tell you about myself that I wish I could be figuring out as well. But really, really curious, Rasmus, the just that experience, even just because you've mentioned it a couple of times, of just even being in the Dalai Lama's presence.
Mm.
Just anything really that comes to mind from what has stayed with you from some of those encounters, and I know that's the relationship that has persisted, but just
Mm.
even from those 5 days you were alluding to, and
Mm.
what that evoked in you.
Yeah, so much. And you can see I have a hard time finding words here. And it's with Dalai Lama, but it's also with quite a few other from that tradition. And I'll share a little story because that was a thing that really touched me deeply. Um, I was giving a retreat, a meditation retreat in southern France at this big retreat center, and suddenly this guy comes walking in these like big rubber boots. It's a monk. He looked very scruffy, like half beard, a little bit of hair, and he comes straight to me and he just looks me in the eye and he takes my hand, and I tell you, I've never felt a hand like that. And his name was Charles. He was called Bodhisattva Charles, which means like good-hearted Charles. And the experience of his look in my eyes, his presence, his hand was so unbelievably overwhelming that I was just in tears. And I had never heard of the guy, never seen the guy before. And I'm sharing it because Dalai Lama and others, we all have all kinds of projections on these people that stirs up all kinds of stuff in ourselves. And then when we meet them, all kinds of emotions come up and we think that was because of them. But really it wasn't. It was our own projections. But here was Bodhisattva Charles, who is a completely unknown old monk from southern France, who just walks up to me, just takes my hand, looks into my eyes and asks how I'm doing. And it just like my heart just vroom, just opened up. And that was probably the first experience I had of what felt to me like a transmission of unconditional love. Meaning, it's not that Charles loved me, but Charles just had so much love within him that when he bumped into me, that is what came out. That is what I was surrounded by. And in Buddhism, it's called, universal compassion or boundless love, whatever you want to call it. And that was such a crazy experience of experiencing that just out of nowhere. And it stayed with me. Like I can to the day today still, like it feels like it was a transmission. I can still, when I give somebody a hand, when I look somebody in the eyes, like what I experienced with Charles and what I've experienced with many others since then. But it kind of became part of me, and it's easy to kind of just bring that forth. Not always, certainly not always, and I wish I could do it all the time and so on, but I don't. But it's always with me. So there's a transmission that you see something. It's like a role modeling, muscle memory. It's really beautiful.
That is absolutely gorgeous. There's, from your sense of that and experience of it, what does that what does that inform you of in terms of, I don't know, what we are or what we're almost capable of?
I think it everything, because it just goes to show that the human potential is so vast. And I don't say that cliche like, oh, we have this potential, we can fly, whatever, like all those wonderful self-help books you find out there. But we are born altruistic, like tons of research showing that both animals and humans are born altruistic. And then we are beaten up in all kinds of ways. So we let go of that a little bit and find like mechanisms to cope with a suboptimal reality. But it's with us all. We have it in us. All of us do. All of us like to do something good for others. There's not a single person on the planet that doesn't actually like to do something to others. Yes, there are also people that like to do harm to others because of their past and so on, or because they're mistaken about what it means to do good. But we all like to do good to others. So that is our innate nature. That is our foundation, is goodness. And for many years, I thought that's such a nice philosophy. But the older I get, the more I see that that's really, really, really true. Unfortunately, there's a lot of research showing that as well. So this, as Buddhists call like Buddha nature, or what, like we all have the potential to be big warm orbs of love and wisdom that can, infect others with that if we bring it to bear. Yeah, no question.
I love just to have an experience of that. I know you said, look, sometimes you can, this may occur, sometimes it may not. But I think, I don't know about for you, but there's something profound shifts just knowing that that exists. Like that can just be
Hmm.
something between two people making
Hmm.
eye contact, no
Hmm.
history, and that this is the possibility from one open-hearted
Hmm.
encounter.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's the one lesson that I would want everybody to not learn but experience. Like if I could click a button and one thing would happen, it would be that everybody for just 1 second felt their innate goodness in its pure form, because everybody has it, and most of us have forgotten mostly about it. And we talk about it's good to be nice, it's good to be kind and so on, but really what we mean down deep, like if we really feel that innate goodness, is just, I just want to give, I just want to help, I just want to share. That's the only thing that is meaningful now, tomorrow, forever. And we all have that. I just wish everybody could have a taste of that.
It's kind of incredible that I think so much kind of moralizing goes around some of these themes, but when you're talking about something as viscerally felt as you've experienced there, it doesn't even seem like there's a a training for it. There's just a returning to what's underneath all
Mm.
these
Yeah.
scars, these experiences, these value systems, and everything else. There's
Yeah.
something so enlivening for me, or something uplifting about the idea that that can be just totally innate. And the way you
Yeah.
described it, it sounds that way.
Yeah. There's no question to me that that is totally innate. It's in all of us, all of us. And I think when people start to experience that, and some of the work that we do in with our clients is to have a look at this and try to bring it forth. And what we see with the leaders and executives who work with this, you change your leadership style, because when you have that orientation and you then have a meeting with one of your employees, followers, whatever, is your first question is not what do I need to make sure they understand or do right, but it is how are they. And at least in my experience, both having led many people for many years, but also having seen people that go through these transformations, it becomes more of a, the first 10 minutes of a 20-minute meeting is just a check-in, like how are we doing, and like what's going on for you. And then the natural thing for that is that the person then says, oh, and by the way, the three things I needed to talk to you about is XYZ. So your approach to how you engage with people changes. It becomes much more relational, which then in turn makes people, do the things that they can and should and really want to do. So it's an incredible transformation it does to relationships, both professionally and personally.
Curious for you, how did things continue to develop from those like initial meetings where you were offering people, or asking people how could you help, and and your partner having to tell them no, he actually means this. Things continue to even take form into their, let's say, even through to their current guys.
Um, so of course people were bewildered, like they literally didn't understand the question. It was so funny, but they could feel the sincerity. And a lot of those conversations, like I think it has turned into like long-standing professional or personal relationships. And so I do have like, I don't think many people can say that, and certainly not an introvert like me, but I have at least 500 people around the world that would feel they have a quite close, intimate relationship with me, even if we don't see each other very often, or maybe not anymore at all, because there's been a real deep touch point that goes beyond just, hey, how are you? And again, it's not that I'm great, it's not that I've done anything great, but I've been in contact with amazing people that have transmitted something to me that I've been able to kind of at least transmit just a little bit of. And that has been incredibly helpful for all the relationships that I have. Most of them, not all. There are a few that unfortunately hasn't gone well, and that's, samsara, imperfection.
For you, has there been any, like, has what along that path has surprised you most as to what's been possible in terms of bringing the sentiments, even the like wisdom traditions in
Hmm.
different ways into corporate spaces?
Hmm. Hmm.
What about that process is almost what surprises you? What first comes to mind in that sense?
How little people actually want to change for the better, sadly. And it's not because they don't want to change, it's because they haven't seen what's possible, and because they're stuck in systems that make them have frames of mind that, it's quite narrow. And that's really sad, because that means there's so much potential that is not coming out, so much love, so much care, so much wisdom, so much clarity, so much like sharpness of mind that they're missing out on, because they're a little bit with the blinders on, just doing what they were taught when they were younger.
And To the other end of a spectrum, then perhaps, what has almost surprised you in the adaptation of some of what you've been
Yeah,
suggesting that you couldn't
yeah,
have imagined when you were, I don't know, practicing, or when you went away
yeah,
on that year-long retreat, wondering how you're going to bring this to the
yeah,
world.
yeah. Having said that, what I just said, also seen like unbelievable. We worked with a little over 1 million people till date, so it's like it's quite expansive work we've done, and I have seen what it can do to a department, a group of leaders, or a full department when you start to introduce these practices collectively. The level of collaboration, the level of humanity that starts to flourish, that can start to flourish if people are willing and ready. It's just unbelievable. And I've seen some very concrete examples of corporate behavior that change. Oftentimes when there's a conflict, sometimes you just let go of people, or when there's a really difficult situation you have to enter into, you just avoid it. And I've seen examples of people that have just chosen to apply full compassion and come to the same result, but in an incredibly human way, rather than the traditional corporate, not very healthy, helpful way. So yeah, I've seen a lot of transformation that is also extremely encouraging, alongside with the generally people don't want to change too much.
It kind of echoes some of the different things we've been talking about in this conversation of just the considerable possibility, and then also, I don't even want to kind of crudely say expansion and contraction kind of aspects of our
Mm.
life. But I'm still kind of aghast at how we can do some of the most horrific things to each other, and yet some little small act or even large act of one human to another that doesn't know them
Mm.
could bring me to tears. Do you
Yeah,
know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's this life. I think the way you're pointing to it, even with the things that come to your mind with work, it's so full.
yeah.
Even, the example of the tragedy that sparked you wanting to move into this, like,
Mm.
there's a fullness to that as
Yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah. There certainly is, and I do think, to your point earlier on, you know, the tragedy that I experienced catalyzed something in me, like an incredible force to do something good. And I think that's also the beauty of pain, of suffering, of going through the hardest times of our lives, is also if we if we go through it without rejecting it, if we allow the sorrow, the pain, the suffering, and give it space, the clarity, the warm heartedness, the energy to move forward it can give us is also tremendous. Like, I wouldn't want to be without anything bad, difficult that has happened in my life, because it really shaped me in so many good ways. Yeah, and I wish everybody could have that kind of, bad things are not bad. Bad things can be really good if you can just learn to be with it, which is hard, difficult, and I fail oftentimes, but hardship is very good for us.
Yeah, I think it's much like the experience with the monk and having an experience or a taste of that. I think,
Hmm.
regardless if we can show up to it every time, just an awareness that that is actually possible is it's one of the things that gives us so much hope. I think, going through life, irrespective of what the present situation is. You,
Yeah.
just, you mentioned it a couple of times, and I don't want to go too far off with this, but could you talk to me about the significance of just a perspective of multiple lives in
Hmm.
terms of how you encounter
Hmm.
this life?
Hmm. Yeah. So first of all, I think people should believe what they want to believe,
Of course.
and I have been a very, like, I'm a very skeptic person. It's not that I came to Buddhism and just, oh, reincarnation, karma, oh, that's great, I'll just adopt that. It took, I think, like 7 years where I kept rejecting it, until I started to look into like some of the Western, like, near death experiences, and a lot of the experience, a lot of the encounters of people that, children that can talk about past lives and go to cities and tell where things are, and like there's going to be a tree around this corner, like all these crazy things. And at some point, I think my stubborn Western scientific mind started to wear on me, and I started to actually open up to the idea, maybe there is something about that idea, that there might have been past lives. And today I'm like looking back at my younger self, how could I even think that that wasn't the case? Because that just doesn't make any sense. So to your question, what has it done to me? That is like the biggest relief, knowing that there will be a life after this makes me not be in a hurry becoming perfect. Like, I don't need to have impatience becoming a better person because I have a chance again. It also helps me to not see difficult things as so difficult. Like, this life is not my real home. This life is just a very short speck of time in a much more expansive dimension where I will exist again in many different shapes and forms. So why worry so much about what went wrong yesterday? It's really helpful.
That sounds absolutely beautiful. And just looking at the time, I'm really then curious to ask, what is a good life for you in this life then?
There is not a one answer to that. Unfortunately, I wish I had that. Again, the book, the $1 billion, but which wouldn't make me happy. No, I know there are a number of things that are really important, and I can say that's for me. I know it's really important for me to be a good person, because if I feel I'm not, I feel very unwell. I know it's very important for me to be surrounded by people that I care about and that care about me. And the closer the relationship, like children, spouses, and family, like it's really, really important. Without that, like nothing is good. And then very specifically for me, like a good life is a life where I have a lot of time in silence and alone. I spend many weeks or months every year in silent retreat, just on my own in nature, because without that I'm just too full of all the impressions of life. So those are at least three things that make up me having a better life.
Rasmus, thank you so much for your time today. I found so much of that absolutely fascinating, from your experiences in Nepal, from your late teens to the monk in a French retreat, to what spurred you on to try to help other people with their own sense of happiness. I'm really grateful for you joining us today on the What is a Good Life podcast.
Mike, thank you so much for wonderful, reflective, calm questions and a wonderful pace. I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much.